Hello, welcome back to my channel, a place where you can let go of your stress while listening to stories found on the internet, or not. You can call me DW, for those who didn't know. So just grab your favorite drink, sit back, and relax. Well now, let's start by turning down the background music, shall we? This is part 4 of a 7-part story. If you haven't finished the previous stories, it is highly recommended to do so before you continue here on. I'm going to leave a link in the description, so no worries. Now, let's start the story. Part 4. The Call. The ringing was sharp, abrasive, in the silence that dominated the dining room. Frank let it ring for a few more seconds as we all watched. In that moment, I felt silly, like I let myself get caught up in some sort of scary campfire story, forgetting to take a step back to recognize the ridiculousness of it all. But still, there I was, holding my breath, as Frank picked up the receiver and held it to his ear. The ringing stopped. Hello? After answering, Frank said nothing, only held the phone, his face expressionless, listening to whoever, whatever, was on the other line. Dr. Reid and Sasha were completely still. I glanced over to Rufus in the doorway, and for a moment, I swear his eyes quickly flitted from me to Frank, as if he had been watching me. When? Frank asked suddenly, furrowing his brow in the slightest as he listened to the response of the other caller. And then, something, a question, a bit more ominous. Which one? And then Frank smiled. I felt Dr. Reid tense next to me as Sasha began to speak. Sir? He started, but was quickly cut off by another raised finger from Frank in his direction. Okay, Frank said with finality, and hung up the phone with a click. There was another moment of silence before he spoke again. Sorry to interrupt, he said jovially, with another relaxed smile. He doesn't like to be kept waiting. Dr. Reid cleared her throat slightly. And who is he? She asked hesitantly. The ghost, Frank said matter-of-factly. Been talking to him for some time now. He never gives me his name, not many details of any sort, but finally, everything's starting to come together. Everything? Sasha asked nervously, his small eyes darting quickly back and forth from Dr. Reid and I to Frank. He's going to help me, Frank started, and you are too. I looked at the other two around me and then back to Rufus in the doorway. This time, he did nothing to mask what he had been doing. We made eye contact, but his expression was enigmatic, telling me nothing. You're going to be part of something big, Frank continued. You're going to bring the dead back to life. Next to me, Dr. Reid laughed, a short, nervous laugh that made Frank frown. What are you talking about? I don't mean to offend, but don't be ridiculous, sir. Sasha, Frank said, causing the bearded man to jerk with alarm. You told us that seeing is believing, but that's not true, is it? Sasha did nothing at this, only watched, clearly disturbed. Hearing. Now that's a sense I've come to trust. The eyes can be deceived, but we, humans, we hear the truth. He paused, then putting his fingers together lightly under his chin, as though pondering something troublesome. You've all no doubt heard the details of my family's murder. Some 40 years ago, he said sadly, continuing despite the lack of response. I, though suspected at first, found innocent, knocked unconscious by the true murderer, and left to find my wife and child's remain in my own sad state upon waking. He shook his head slightly. Those reports, though mostly accurate, are somewhat incomplete. Although knocked unconscious and rendered immobile in the next room, I could still hear the screams of my wife and child. Yes. He shuddered slightly at this. But something else too. A voice. His own voice grew more grave, but with a sharpness to it. Anger. I recognized his voice. The voice of my family's killer. His fingers lightly tapped the tip of either of his hands, and his eyes, perhaps out of habit, drifted off somewhere into the distance, as though wistfully looking back into the past. And I, blind, from the blow to the head he gave me, 40 years in darkness, but not in silence. I can still hear them, of course, all three of them. And this was all I had, for a while, my own shadowy memory, until he first called. It happened when I was alone, in one of the spare rooms upstairs. The phone rang next to me, but since Rufus was nowhere to be found, I answered. And that's when all this started, he said pleasantly, motioning with one hand around the table. All this what? Sasha asked with trepidation. Well, the ghost, tells me he's been here for years, long before any of my tragedies, and long before my family ever lived in this house. Apparently, he died here. A gas leak, if you can believe it. The old man laughed, and he'd like us to help him leave. Frank sat in expectant silence. But why us? Why would we do that? Dr. Reid questioned beside me. Because he asked for you, Dr. Reid, and you, Sasha. And then Frank turned his head ever so slightly, those blank eyes nearly meeting my own. And you, Samuel. We're to set him free with a ritual. From what he describes, it's very simple. And then he'll be free to roam about where he pleases, no longer trapped in this house. In exchange, he'll give me the information I seek. And what's that? I heard myself ask, feeling validated in contributing to this conversation after it had taken such a strange and personal turn. With this, Frank gave another slight, small smile. The identity of my family's killer. The ghost was here for it, all of it, and he has answers. For a moment more, we all sat, looking at one another. Sasha looked at me. Dr. Reid looked at Sasha. Rufus, almost a specter himself, watched everything from the doorway. I don't know about this, Sasha finally said, causing Frank to frown. I don't like the sound of this ritual. Don't think it's so arcane. Frank said dismissively. Perhaps ritual hadn't been the best choice of words. You're an academic man, Alexander. Frank continued, speaking smoothly. Think of it more as an experiment. One that, if successful, would help clear an old man's conscience and alter the way we see reality itself. Sasha shook his head, but said nothing. I myself, I admit, was torn. Though definitely creepy, I mostly found this situation sad. An old crippled man, robbed of his sight and his family in one go, grasping at the most insane of straws to attain some kind of solace. Although thoroughly weirded out, I was not unsympathetic. I'll do it. This came from my right as Dr. Reid looked steadily at Frank, whose wrinkled face broke out into a large grin. Thank you, Dr. Reid. You won't regret it. Then silence again. Okay, Sasha said suddenly, putting up his hands defensively. I will help you. At this, Frank smiled even wider. Excellent, Sasha. Then, silence once more. I looked at these people in front of me and considered my options. Leave. With only the level of creepiness that had been accumulated up until that point to weigh heavily on my mind, or stay and get what I assumed my bosses would see as the most interesting profile they'd gotten in a while. Then my eyes met Rufus once more, and for a moment I saw it. The slight, almost imperceptible shaking of his head. And yet still, I surprised myself. I'm in. Wonderful, Samuel. And bring that camera of yours. We wouldn't want you to miss this. Where are we going? Sasha asked, dabbing with his napkin the sweat that had appeared on his forehead. The place where I'm afraid my conversational spirit died. The oldest place in the house. The basement. Next time, this, and so much more. And that is the end of part 4. Well, what do you think? Is the story good? Let me know in the comment section down below, and please subscribe if you haven't yet. We'll see you again next time. Sweet dreams.